They told me to get the F out of here. And they didn't want me here, white people here, or the media here. Because the only time when we come into these communities is when we want to talk about something negative.
This is the
Independent
Filmmaker's Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
On IFG, we talk about independent film from development through delivery. By featuring discussions with creators and collaborators about their experiences, we form a roadmap to help you have the most success with your projects. Photographers and documentary filmmakers have always been extremely important when it comes to telling the stories of major events and social shifts, and can even be the catalyst for entire movements. But photographers need to be mindful and prepared in a number of ways. We're joined by 5 visual storytellers from around the US to speak on what the photographer's role is today.
This is like our tool to contribute to the movement. And we just have to figure out what your specific role is in contributing your creative vision.
I'm your host, Stephen Pierce. Today we take a break from our normal format of talking about independent film to examine something more pressing right now in our society: the journalistic integrity of filming and photographing protests, marches, and riots.
I think when there is that moment of, when you see that vulnerable moment, that's when your skill as a photographer is like challenged, right? Because if you are going to capture that experience, you can't take like 25 shots.
That's Eva Woolridge, Brooklyn-based photographer known for her work in The Buzz, Rolling Stone, and Cosmopolitan.com.
Here on the streets, as I was photographing the protests that week, mainly for a week, the munitions they were using, the kinds of rubber bullets were a little different. They could be lethal if you were really close, but it wasn't like what I'd seen, in Palestine or Egypt.
And that's Michael Christopher Brown, known for his work in the Libyan Civil War, on National Geographic, and more recently his project Aftermath, in the wake of the death of George Floyd.
I have not had that experience, and this guy told me very candidly, is like, yeah, we're tired of being slaughtered by the police. We're tired.
That's Max Gersh, Memphis-based journalism photographer that covered the Louisville marches.
It was only me and one other Black female photojournalist, and then the rest, maybe 5 or 6, were white. So when you have that disproportion there, that also affects the fair and balance of what's being told.
And that's Lindsay Weatherspoon, Atlanta-based videographer and photographer. Her work's been seen on USA Today, The New York Times, ESPN, and NPR, among others.
I can start off that I've been photographing the Black Lives Matter movement since Trayvon. And since what has happened now, I look at myself as a photographic artist, not a journalist.
And that's Sheila Pre-Bright, Atlanta-based photographer known for her photographs of civil rights activists and the Black Lives Matter protest.
So I'm actually looking for something different from what the media is projecting, of stereotypes. So when I go out and I shoot, I try to look at different things when I shoot. I want you to see I don't look at marginalized communities, my communities, as victims, but as human. And I go out and I try to capture images where the audience or the viewers are looking at it, where I want you to feel it. I want you to see it. I want you to see the hurt and the pain. So I'm not really capturing a lot of the images that when journalists have to go out and what the photo editors want to see. And then I shoot strictly in black and white.
Thank you guys for having this topic be available, because this is something, especially covering the protests lately, that has been on my heart and what I've observed while in the field. I am a fine arts portraiture photographer that also documents movements. The subjects I primarily focus on are Black women and expansion of gender and sexual orientation within the Black community, and like the mixed race experience as well. But then I also apply my fine art background into documenting, immediate events and cultural movements. And what I look for is not to solely focus on Black trauma and Black pain. I like to capture joy, the momentum, the strength, the perseverance that is happening hand in hand whenever there's a movement like this, and also just the day in the life of a Black person. So my heart really goes into ensuring that we are archived completely as a complex community, multiple communities. And, we'll dive into this further, but I do find it interesting. I sense there is a responsibility that needs to be acknowledged when photographing movements that you may not look like the people that are leading those movements. And, finding that balance of how you can take your past experiences and apply it to the same movements that we're all capturing without being a voyeur to that experience, without focusing on Black trauma, because we see enough of that.
When I cover something like this, to some extent, I bring the same mentality I bring to everything else, no matter what it is, which is to show the truth of what's there. I think it's really easy to go to any type of, to go to anything with a preconceived idea of what we're going to see. And I think it's all of our responsibility to throw that out the door before we step out of our car and before we pick up our camera. It is easy to fall into one narrative or another, but I think the responsibility of any journalist on the ground is to look for the truth and document the truth, and listen. I make it a point to get everywhere early, not to take pictures, but to talk to people, to hear what's happening. I know, especially in certain communities that I may not have spent time in before, I don't know the dynamic. I don't want to bring my preconceived ideas. I want to listen, to be able to tell those stories, to share that, to share the community's emotion, to whether that's joy, whether that's suffering, whatever it is. I want to tell that story, and I want the people that view my pictures to connect with that in a way that they are feeling the truth and able to expand their understanding based on the experiences of the people in my photographs.
And Lindsay, how do you approach, whenever you go, what are you looking for in your artistic approach to capturing public conflict?
Well, let me start off by saying that this was the first time I've ever photographed a protest. So walking into it, I honestly did not have an idea of what was going to happen, let alone what to look for. So, in general, whenever I'm on an assignment or if I'm doing personal work, I'm genuinely looking for someone that I can connect with instantly, whether that is in a friendship manner or a safety manner. So I'm looking for people who I know that will, that's showing some type of, or expressing some type of emotion, and it's raw. So I typically go to people, and I never approach anyone. Most of the time people are approaching me because they're just curious. So after that curiosity is set in, then we genuinely have a good conversation with each other. But just like with any other assignment that I have, I'm looking for intimate moments. I'm looking for passion. I don't look to put anyone down into how they're feeling. I want to feel it myself. So it's not so much of, taking away from what the actual moment is, but expressing it the best way that I can through my visual interpretation. So that's what I usually take into any assignment, whether it's going to be a portrait assignment or one that is a breaking news. It's the same thing. My
way of working is actually, it's kind of constantly evolving, and I sort of have worked on assignment as a photojournalist for a number of years. Though I also, on the side, I also work on my own projects, which are a little different. But much of my work has been sort of overseas in previous years, and it's only really been actually in the last 6 months that I really began working more seriously in the U.S. I live in LA now, and we have a baby. So, that combined with COVID, I don't really want to be on the road. So I've been sort of, yeah, just essentially like learning so much about photographing in the States, and just after working a lot in Africa and other countries, and but at the end of the day, I mean, I went to school for journalism, visual communication. It was a photojournalism program, and and over the years, it's kind of like, I've been exposed to various practices, but I just I'm really happy to be a part of this panel here, because I feel like I've been learning so much from colleagues of mine and other people photographing in the U.S., photographers and artists as well, making work about the Black community and other POC communities, and understanding the way that I've looked at things in the past, as a white male photographer. And I think, of course, the white, that like a lot of white people are, beginning to look at themselves a little differently, or very differently. And certainly I'm one of those.
How do you approach something like, I mean, I guess we'll start with, COVID and Black Lives Matter. I mean, these whole things they feel very physically, emotionally overwhelming, like, walking into a space where there are so many people. And how do you dissect that? How do you, approach walking in here, and where does your artistry begin, and where does your empathy end? Like, how do you approach that?
I mean, I think for me, I noticed when you go into the field and you first observe, like, okay, who's there, right? And your immediate response to, like, who's there. And mine personally was how profound it was to see more white people in the protests than there were Black people, and how that was long overdue. And to have like a sea of white allies, or people just understanding what an allyship is, to yell Black Lives Matter made me emotional, because like this is a conversation that, really became in the forefront when Trayvon Martin died, but no one was really acknowledging it. It was just Black people leading, and we weren't getting the media it truly deserved, despite it being an international conversation. It still didn't get what it deserved. And it took social media development and for us to really see, like, oh, this is actually a daily experience for Black people. And so when you go into the protest and then see how many people are showing up, I want to reflect that. I want to show like the passion that, and it's a hard balance, because I don't want to focus on like white people being there. It's not about that. But I did want to at least acknowledge that this was a new moment in, I think human history, to be honest.
Yeah. How much does it, like, your feeling of being there, how much does that impact the way you shoot?
Oh, I mean, I'll quickly say I'm a crazy empath, and I'm a Pisces too. So I'm all water sign, and I feel a lot of, and I'm fortunate that I don't know how I really do it, but it's invoked in my photography. I get personally moved. Like, I photographed this woman in Brooklyn who her daughter was crying on her shoulder. The older woman was holding her, and we made eye contact as I photographed her, and her dog was sad too as she was holding her other dog. Like, it was the format was like a triangle of emotion, and no one else saw what was happening. But I call it intuition, but that was like the moment, despite everyone walking and people walking in the streets and chaos around, like that was a moment I saw. And I can only say it was like intuitive. But
I think that's what makes photographers or creatives special, where we can be in the moment and also see something that no one else may have never noticed. So, the empathy part, I don't think it ever ends, whether you are, in protest mode or portrait mode or whatever the case you may be in. Even if you're just driving down the street and you see somebody, it's like, oh, that would make, a powerful statement. But what would be the purpose of me taking that photo at the moment? So empathy never leaves. It's always in your heart, and it's always going to be in your work too.
Yeah, for me, since I have been photographing earlier on with Trayvon, I don't go in with those types of receptions. I go in as one with my community, even though I'm not from the community. And I'll give you an example. When I was in Baltimore that Sunday when Freddie Gray had passed, and when I went into the community, and I've been to Detroit, marginalized communities, some about Baltimore was different from me. And I was really looking at the landscape of the community versus the people. And since they did not know me, I actually got cursed out. They told me to get the F out of here. And they didn't want me here, white people here, or the media here. Because the only time when we come into these communities is when we want to talk about something negative. And I had to think fast on my feet about what am I going to say. And I said, look, you guys do not know me. I'm Black like you. I'm from Atlanta, the home of the civil rights movement. And I want to tell our story. And once I go into these communities where it's not a protest, I really connect with the people before I even start photographing. And like I said, I'm looking for things that I want to show versus what the media is showing. Because I don't know if I can't remember her name. We want to show all of it, but I'm particularly interested on us. And the empathy with that, because the other is going to be shown anyway.
Mm-hmm. And Sheila, I agree with that experience that you had, because I went on a solo trip to New Orleans. Like, it was traveling. It was a good time, not on assignment or anything. But it was the first time I was in New Orleans. So the culture, if you've been there, it's just like, it's magic, truly. And it's like, you don't see that valuable side of the Black experience too often with so much color too in the United States. And so when I was photographing, some of the subjects were like, what is this going to be used for, et cetera. And I met and befriended a photographer friend of mine who just talked about, like, the publications will hire white photographers to come into these Black spaces to photograph, capitalize off of it, exploit the community in whatever way they would want, whether it's positive, light, or negative. But that money in from that goes back to that publication or where they came from. It doesn't go back into the community that they photographed. So even I'm a Black woman, and, they can see, though I was a tourist, like, I'm within that community. I did beyond the tourist experience, but there was still a privilege I had to acknowledge, to recognize I was an outsider that still needs to consider the social accountability and the responsibility of, like, how am I going to give back to this community if I choose to, like, make sales from the photos, which I didn't. Instead, I made it a photos essay about why it's important to be accountable and not to exploit communities you find exotic or different.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it was short-sighted of me, but I'd never actually thought of that as being something you're almost like going to a community and, capitalizing upon their loss, their pain. You know what I mean? Like, there's a world in which that is, so how much does that affect the way you approach these things? I mean, you're saying, Sheila, being cursed out. That's something I wanted to talk about too. How some of these images are incredibly impactful, and they're filled with pain and conflict. How do you stand there and get that image and take that? And do you deal with the person? I mean, what is that interaction like, that relationship?
Well, for me, shooting protests is a little bit different because sometimes you cannot connect with the people. But I built a relationship with a lot of that young activists that I was dealing with, and they really trusted me because I have a book out called 1960 Now. Haven't made any money off of it, but if I do, I will be giving back, okay? But I think for me, I don't never go into a situation looking at, am I going to sell this? I'm going to get it notoriety. Am I going to get all these likes? It's not about that for me. It's about me educating universally so, because I've traveled internationally and nationally. So talking about Black Lives Matter and the book to a lot of the colleges. And I myself, as an image maker, feel like, why am I doing this work? Because now we had George Floyd, not Austin Sterling, all the rest of the new ones. And what makes this so different? Okay, I might be going off track, okay? And I felt, because I didn't want to go out and photograph more imagery, because I feel that the images, people don't care. It's hard for people to change. But when I went out this time, I felt a different kind of energy. And that energy, maybe it is because you have more diverse people, but I didn't feel the tension like I did with Trayvon Martin all the way up, because of how the cops were out there too, but it's different. And I don't know if it's because there's more diversity out there, but I feel it's different for me. It's different.
I think we're also at a really unique time in history where we've had this building of police shootings, and we've had these issues that have been growing. And like you were saying earlier, that it seemed like the diversity in the crowds weren't there. The support wasn't necessarily there from the white community, and we're seeing that differently now. And I think part of it, honestly, is because of COVID. And I think it's each thing in its own right is terrible, but by having these global traumas occur at the same time, and it's giving people time to sit around and read and reflect and understand and process things that were easy to ignore by going out to a bar or a club or whatever, going out and do their own thing. We're all stuck at home now. And now all of a sudden, people also have a way to go outside, be around people, and feel like they're doing something that's very important. And, I think that is a happy coincidence of this, is that these traumas have brought us all together. We have experienced global trauma collectively, and to different degrees. And people are starting to say, hey, I get it now. I maybe don't get it like you get it, but I get it. And I think that is part of what makes this time different. And, while I was in Louisville, the police shot and killed another man during the protests. And, there was a lot of tension. What's going to happen? Is this going to continue to escalate? And what I saw that night was the greatest celebration of community I've ever seen in my life, and nearly brought me to tears, because there was a time where people weren't sure what was going to happen. Is it going to turn violent? Is it the police going to come in? And when the community kind of proved that this was their place to be, and they stood their ground with that, and the police left, there was just this great celebration. And I have not seen widespread, like you were saying before, in other protests, there's people that want to kick out the media. They want to kick out people that are not part of that community. But I had so many people realizing, hey, this is a historic moment. Please photograph me. I want the world to know I was here. I want to be part of this history, this change. And I think that's wonderful that people are taking accountability, to be change makers in the community. And I'm glad we're all out there documenting it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so how does it ever occur to you while you're in situations like that are kind of a powder keg or tense that could turn how much does your thoughts turn to your safety in the situation versus what you are there to do?
To lay the foundation of saying that this was my first time, my very thought was just to navigate through the crowd and, try my best to see from afar. Because, I also have to think about that I'm a woman. Safety is always going to come first. So in that same instance, thinking about what could be just as impactful from afar rather than being up close to the action of what's going on. And there was another thought that I had to basically say that, just to piggyback off of what Max was saying, was that we're not 2020 has the sole meaning of clear vision. And I feel like this year, from what we're seeing and in this dynamic, our vision definitely has become much more clear as to systemic racism, as to trauma, as to what's affecting the Black trans community, things of that nature. So, we may joke about how 2020 has, gone array, but in essence, we're seeing much more than what some of us have never realized, both, Black, white, and other, and POC. We're seeing so much, and so much is coming out of us and evolving and changing. So, while we're out there taking these photos and, filming protests or filming peaceful moments, filming quiet moments in our own home, those are just as effective as being out with everybody else. It's the joy of being out there with your own is very palpable. You feel it. You feel a thump in your heart every time. But we're still going to be making these images as impactful from here until whenever. Outside of protests. Not just pigeonholing us to the protests that are just going on, but realizing that Black life has been happening around us all this time. And it's so unique to what the experience is right now. And I hope I made sense by what I was just saying.
I mean, I had to just to hop on also. In Brooklyn, we had the Black Trans Lives Matter march. And it was one of the most profound moments, because my trans family were able to feel seen. And, being a queer person in Brooklyn right now, it's like, the underground scene is there. You know the community, the people. So that the fact that this is hit like international news, and I photographed, but it was not for an assignment, and it wasn't even an aggressive form of photograph. I just wanted to be present, because I think we can all agree that when we're like, oh, I'm here to shoot, you're just like bop, bop, in, out, like weaving in, weaving out. And to Lindsay's point, there is a sense of security that you have to honor for yourself. Like, I can easily jump into something not even realizing that it could be an unsafe situation, because I'm so focused to photograph, and we get so charged into that I have to, my friends will be like, okay, at least tap me on the shoulder if you're about to dart. Like, is that right? Which I didn't do, but it's, we have to consider our well-being first. And it is tough, because as Black women photographers, I think that's stuff that sometimes is held against us, and it's not fair, because we're equally as courageous and ready to put ourselves out there. But I'm also not going to go, head to head with a cop with a barrel in my face, just because I already know what is going to happen. If one of you two do that, I would say in the past you were less likely to get hurt, but now cops are really just going for anyone. So sometimes it just frustrates me, though, that it's just there is a lack of understanding of the Black woman's photographic experience, and people not holding us to the same caliber, even though we're at that same level.
With my experience, I had other colleagues of mine, when they see something, I was getting ready, a cop started charging after me, grabbing me, and another colleague saw that and he grabbed me back, because if not, they would have snatched me up. I mean, I've been in the middle of the cops with the protesters, and I'm sandwiched in between. And it sounded like a gun was going off. And I'm a daughter of a soldier. When I heard that, I went to the ground, because that's what my father told me to do, and got back up. So they look at us like we're just little frail little things, but we're not, you know what I'm saying? And I go into one thing about it with me in any of these situations, because I've been in very intense situations, you cannot go in there with fear because people will sense that. You cannot have any fear like that. And I think that's how I'm able to move with this. And then back when I was photographing the first phrase of Black Lives Matter, I always would hook up with the Nation of Islam and let them know that I would be coming to town.
Michael, thinking about other scenarios, like other than just Black Lives Matter, how much did safety come into play whenever you're filming it or when you're shooting in Libya?
When you're on the front line all the time, for sure. How can I backstep? Well, just here on the streets, as I was photographing the protests that week, mainly for a week, the munitions they were using, the kinds of rubber bullets were a little different. They could be lethal if you were really close, but it wasn't like what I'd seen, in Palestine or Egypt or other places, but still aggressive. But just sort of having a bit of experience with that, it helped, in terms of where I can be and where I can place myself. And there's so many things I want to say. I think this is just like, I grew up in the Northwest in Washington State, north of Seattle, in the middle of nowhere. There was one Black person in my high school. Going into Seattle as a kid, I would see a couple Black people here and there, but hardly had any exposure. I had a few Mexican friends in school, but that was it. My father's a physician, so he worked quite a bit in Haiti and Mexico, Romania, and other countries. And he would work in these orphanages and come back and bring these photographs of his patients and what he had seen and these communities. And those images, he would show those in front of the community, and this would help raise money for the orphanages. So from a very early age, that was sort of instilled in me. So that's, besides wanting to see the world and understand the world, because I grew up so protected and in a place where I wasn't exposed. That's kind of, from a very young age, I learned about justice, and human rights and, the dignity. And so that's really driven me into a lot of these places. But I think also what's happening now, of course, because I am a white male and I've been like extremely privileged and very lucky in this business. I've had like so many opportunities and, but I think also over the years that I just, with everything happening now, I have to be, I always should have been, but I think my awareness wasn't as open as it is now in terms of like how I contextualize, these communities overseas and also here. So I've been working on a Skid Row project since the beginning of the year. Again, it's kind of the first time that I've really ever worked in the US, seriously, for like many years. And, my intentions going to this community, which is extremely vulnerable, mostly Black, have always been very good. But my problem was with the presentation, because I had these assumptions as if, if I load these images on my Instagram, I'm sharing stories and videos, I'm wanting them to share their voice, but like we can no longer assume that people will assume that we have good intentions and that we have to always provide, enough context, caption, information. And then why are we doing these things? I mean, I'm constantly asking myself questions like, I know at the end of the day that I have really good intentions. I'm there for the right reasons, but at the same time, much of my photography really is a record of these communities through the white gaze. So it's been nice that some of the projects I've worked on have brought money back into these communities. So with Skid Row, they published it in National Geographic, and then it was on the local news here. And I had a few friends contact me and random people contact me. Where do I send money? But it's such so difficult now for me. I feel like I'm really, I'm beginning to awaken, and understand that I've been conditioned for so many years because of how I learned photography, and because I went to photography school and I've been working in this business for 15 years, it's like there are good aspects, and there's also aspects that are just clearly I was not awake. And it's such a beautiful time now where it's, I'm literally educating myself like through the eyes of Black photographers. I've been loading a lot of their images on my Instagram and just exploring that world that, and I have friends, colleagues who are sharing experiences with me in a way that I never, like, why did we need an event like this? And so we could awaken, or begin to awaken. But there was something about that video and the imagery, the video that Ms. Fraser, Darniella Fraser, I believe, was the woman who made that video of George Floyd. And it's just, there was something about that. I saw that and I was like screaming here in the studio. I was so angry. Like, and again, it's not because I'm Black. It's not because I even understand that experience, but just as a human, seeing that, I was so angry. And I think that has to be what pulled a lot of other white people into the streets too.
I'm really proud of you that you're in this moment of like awakening. I struggle with like applauding the white awakening, but I also acknowledge that like we're all human and we're trying to do our best. And, there's such a long history of like whitewashed education that like it's not fair to hold so many people so accountable when it's like, if you weren't born in that experience to learn on your own what that was like, then like, how could you have really learned unless you were like, your soul was immediately about the justice in general. But it's just interesting that in photography specifically, it has always been a form because it invokes so much emotion, it has, to me, always been a form that exploits also. Like we have the history of white photographers photographing lynchings and selling postcards of those imagery. And to me, it doesn't go exactly hand in hand, but it does in a way. That video of George Floyd is a viral public lynching that brought awareness, just like the postcards did. The abolition movement developed even further, and they actually banned the postcards from being used because there was such an outrage of how much it was being produced. But again, that was a white photographer that saw this like festive occasion of a Black person being lynched to capitalize off of it. So we can't shy away from that real history. Right now, I was just watching a documentary when I should have been working, but I wasn't, of Disclosure that talks about the trans experience in media specifically. And I think all photographers in film should look at this documentary on Netflix because it's talking about specifically what we do, media, or providing imagery of representation in some capacity, and how it could be used for good, but oftentimes it is used to mock or other community that are just trying to figure themselves out, and they need authentic representation to figure themselves out. So it's like, how can we all, think about it together and try to contribute what we can to structure the narrative to be more positive and uplifting, right?
It sounds a lot like context is the one of the most important parts of this. So what is a good example of how you can you should contextualize your imagery in these kind of ways, and what are some examples of poor contextualization?
Well, first you have to try to decolonize the whole art world, but that'll take that'll take
I think
years.
it's the media too. It's decolonizing the media and the art world, because the media project those images. How many times have we seen Black men on top of cars with the fires? Okay. For example, when the protest started up with George Floyd, I didn't go out the first time, and I said, what can I do to do more layering of the protest? So I went to the mothers whose children have fallen to police brutality and took images of that of the press conference. And Washington Post loved them, but it didn't make the cut. It's the usual imagery. So how my question is, because you still have the photo editors that are there that's telling you what images they like or not like. That's why I don't usually work for journalists. I start my work on my own. And that's how I was able to, I guess, get a book out, because people said my work looked different. And I think, Lindsay, I'm going to be quiet, but you were talking about decolonize, but I think it has to work in all, because a stereotype of someone is ingrained in someone's consciousness. I did a body of work called Suburbia, won a major award on it. And do you know, everybody told me that I didn't have enough signifiers in that work to show that they were Black homes. And this was in 2006.
Yeah, so not too long ago, which, I mean,
right.
You are absolutely right, because just being in Atlanta, Sheila and I would usually see each other at the same event, and unfortunately, but fortunate that we do see it, is that I'll give you a perfect example. When a couple of days after Rayshard Brooks was killed, we went out to Wendy's. You weren't there that time, Sheila, but while I was out there, it was only me and one other Black female photojournalist, and then the rest, maybe 5 or 6, were white. So when you have that disproportion there, that also affects the fair and balance of what's being told, and having Black people on the ground during a situation of such, like the tone and the timbre of how things are going at that time. So where one person may hear it as anger, we hear it as, like a sense of frustration, but it's not anything to be afraid, afraid of. So we have to, and I'm saying we, because sometimes even I fall at fault for, thinking one thing and it's not true. But we also have to be aware of what the overall temperature of the environment is. Everything is not anger. Everything is not, fire and brimstone. Folks are just emotional. And the same emotion that I share was probably the same way that you would do it as well. So I think once we decolonize our own minds around what feelings look like among other cultures, then we can start to see that the narrative is nothing more than what it is in that very moment.
I think that's so true. And, you can see that reaction based on how people cover these type of events.
Yeah.
And, I went to a workshop last year, and one of the speakers was Kenny Irby. I don't know if you all know Mr. Irby, but he is a big name in the photojournalism community. He's a Black man. He was in charge of the visual side at Pointer for a while. And he's since worked, he was in St. Pete, and he works trying to empower young Black men to stay out of trouble and to kind of go through church and through education and things like that. And he's doing great work outside of the photo community, but he still gives back to the photo community. And since I met him, there's this quote he said to us that I have not been able to get out of my head, and I'm grateful I can't get it out of my head, is, "My opinion is no match for your experience." And I think if we all think about that, when we pick up our camera, I think I understand what's going on, but it reminds me, I need to talk to people. I need to listen. I need to hear, and I need to feel. And while I may never have the exact same experiences, I can do my best to relate and convey what you're telling me. But if I don't ever ask, if I don't make those approaches, like you were saying, people see things and they say, "Oh, that's scary. That's somebody yelling." I saw people that shied away because there were a lot of protesters that had guns in one part of town. And I went up and I talked to them, not to say, "Hey, why are you carrying a gun? Don't you think that's, reckless?" I just wanted to meet these people this was their home. This was their neighborhood, because I've never lived there. I have not had that experience. And this guy told me very candidly, is like, yeah, we're tired of being slaughtered by the police. We're tired. You know, the way he told me that, it was not like, hey, if a cop shows up, I'm going to pull out my gun and shoot the guy. But they said, hey, in downtown, they're using rubber bullets. In this side of town, they're using real bullets. And we're going to stand up for our community. We're going to stand up for our family, for our friends. It was not a call of violence. It was a call of self-defense. And by having that conversation with him, it gave me a better understanding. And I think they appreciated, this guy in particular appreciated that I was not afraid to come talk to him and learn and admit I don't understand. I have not had that experience as a white man, like you guys were saying. There's definitely, at least historically, a difference of being able to be around the police and have a sense of security and safety as a white man that maybe, in these protests was not as secure as it had been previously, but
took you guys up.
I had a baton in the back, during this. It's like,
glad you're okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So working in the face of authority, I think, is one thing that's really important, because I think a lot of the images that come out that really stick in my mind from any civil upheaval are not images of a group of people usually standing. It's like images of, a story of a conflict that is happening that's very personal and very close. How do you get in the front line like that and, stand in the face of authority and be an artist while maintaining your, not being harmed? Or do you just accept the fact that you might be?
I think just accept it, to be honest. It's like
it's too important.
Yeah.
It's too important to not be there.
Yeah. And this is like our tool to contribute to the movement. All of ours. Like not just, us. It is all of ours. And we just have to figure out what your specific role is in contributing your creative vision into it. I had by the way, that was a great quote. That was like a killer quote. Thank you for sharing that. I had a teacher that taught me that the best photography can be taken in your own backyard. It doesn't require huge traveling or something like that, right? And I know this is kind of a tangent from your question, but we have to ensure that we are bringing our own past experiences, no matter what our identity is, and figure out through that gaze how you were going to capture that. But you also have to acknowledge the information that you do not know yet, that the privilege that you've experienced, and how far that has taken you. So it's amazing how many different ways one image can be photographed. So how can you bring that past life experiences that you had, and how are you going to implement that in how are you going to capture this movement, this space, because it's going to be very different than mine. And I think the responsibility to make sure you are not stepping on the toes or trying to take over the space, right? Is figuring that out. I couldn't tell you. I don't know what your past experience is, but there's a way that we can do this together. And I think you, Michael and Max, using your platform to educate your colleagues, and even conversations like this, like you have 3 Black women that are openly and, assertively expressing our experience in the same industry that you are in. And how can you, how can you use that to help the movement? Because to try to go back to your original question, Stephen, violence is going to occur, and we just hope that we can protect ourselves. So if you see, we can't think of capturing the movement in a competitive sense. Though, unfortunately, I do feel that way when I see a lot of white photographers there, and I'm trying to get the image, and they're like, I'm like, can you move over? And they're like, no. Like, I'm trying
it's
to.
It's very disrespectful. He walks right in front of you, and I just shake my head. Yeah.
You just have to.
I had a white guy to tell me to move.
I had one to put their hands on me to push me out of the way, and I really went off on them.
So what we're telling you, take that information. And if you see that happening, that's the moment to be an ally, guys. That's the moment to be like, yo, she's doing the job just like we are. Like, don't touch her, that type of stuff. And I can't even tell you how much that feels good to be protected by people that may not look like us, right? And it's not that white savior complex. It's just like a human being acknowledging another human's being, talent and experience, and how you can use your privilege to protect in some capacity. And that includes when we put ourselves on the line, in front of cops and stuff like that.
Just to echo that, I'm really fortunate that on our staff in Memphis, we have a young Black female photographer. And while she's a newer in the industry, she teaches me a lot just by her perspective on life. And I realize every day how fortunate I am to work alongside somebody like that. But and what you were saying about, violence is going to happen. From my experience, it was always instigated by the police. But I had protesters
99% of the time it is.
Absolutely. And that's what all I can show is what I see, but I had protesters that I met up with earlier in the day. Like you guys were saying, you're out in the community, you're making allies, you're meeting people, you're getting a sense of the temperature of everything and just getting to know people. And this girl couldn't have been more than 20 years old, said, hey, if I see the police messing with you, or if I see other, some of the what I would likely call the suburban people that are there to cause trouble, it seemed like it was the white teenagers that were just there to cause trouble. If
you
she
had
said,
Antifa there too. I know who they are. They're out there too.
So yeah. She said, if I see anybody, whether it's protesters or police messing with you, if I see somebody trying to steal your cameras off your shoulder, I got you. I'm gonna come up and I'm gonna work to protect you because it's human. It's a human thing we should all be doing, looking out for each other. And it's disgusting when we see that, when we see photographers trying to push somebody out of the way or say, hey, this is my spot. Or it's like, we can work together. We can work around each other. We can work with each other.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point that I just don't understand why people don't get it. Like if we're all there with the same mission, there's going to be a photographer that knows, this subject, this person, whatever the case may be. We can all work in tandem and not, like you said, even work in competition. We have no conflict. We have the same goal. And I experienced that a couple of days ago where I recognized somebody and the rest of the white photographers didn't. I'm just like, I know my people. I know what we look like. So the thing is, like, if you embrace the fact that none of us know everything and that we combine with our forces combined, that we can be great together, then this could be so much better than what it is now. And I'm glad that we're having these open and honest conversations so we don't have to deal with this as much. And I don't want to say any more, but as much as we do right now.
Yeah, because when I was out, I went to the aftermath, Lindsay, not that Friday, was it Saturday it happened? I went Sunday. And when the journalists nudged me out of the way, one of the women in the community said, you have taken enough and you need to move to let everybody else. And it was someone in the community that was looking out for me.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought you thought
it was all the way around, Eva. Like, no. I was like, wait, who said that? No, I'm about to say Atlanta has been pretty vigilant on looking out for us. There's just everybody else is just like, you need to move. But I mean, you can tell. And Sheila, just like at Rashard's service, you could tell it was like it was. This is a bad example, but it was like roaches to one subject. All of the photographers came to one person. I think it was Sheila saw her first and I saw her next, but I was off. I was far from the subject. And then everybody started crouching down. All of the white photographers started, invading this woman's space, taking pictures of her. I'm just like, this is why certain things and, you know, certain people, I want to say allowed, but understand what certain praise methods look like, what certain mourning looks like, you know, mourning the death of someone. And I just could not imagine being in a space where I am literally mourning and I have a photographer at my feet taking pictures of me in a very vulnerable moment. So again, when you are not familiar with what things look like, you take advantage of it in the most, you know, inopportune manner.
And at the funeral of Richard, I was very, very emotional. Very emotional.
Well, it was an emotional
and,
moment.
And there's things that I will not photograph because of that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna. That's where I was kind of wanting to go next. Where's this line of documenting versus existing in the space, and where does that line go for you? So, for specifically, these sometimes are violent protests. There are people that are having extremely emotional, you know, moments. When do you and how do you determine when to be a person in the space and when to be a photographer and an artist?
I think when there is that moment of, when you see that vulnerable moment, that's when your skill as a photographer is like challenged, right? Because if you are going to capture that experience, you can't take like 25 shots. I think it is a fine line. I do think capturing the emotion is important. I do think capturing the grief is important. But 1 or 2 shots. If you didn't get it, then you didn't get it. You cannot, like Lindsay said, you cannot be a roach, like trying, seeking, and pulling every piece that you can. So I do think capturing all aspects of the movement or any subject or anything like that is important if your eye gets that. But you need to, your talent is going to show up, and you have to see how strong your skill set is to be able to capture those moments in the 1 or 2 shots, and that's it. And you keep it moving because you're still a human being, and we are observers of the human experience, but we cannot completely detach ourselves from that experience. So we have to find that balance in order to keep our sanity, to keep our moral compass, while documenting history.
I think that's so true, because you do see in certain circumstances where, you know, people that claim to be photojournalists act more like paparazzi. And, you know, you hear the cameras clicking and the flashes firing, whatever, you know, and there needs to be some delicacy. But I think we are humans before we're journalists, before we're photographers. And we have to remember that. And it's always worth considering the impact of your picture. You know, is the image worth the potential added trauma? You know, in certain circumstances, you know, and that's where, you know, the more experience you have covering something, or even just existing in this type of environment, and you build your own judgment. And that doesn't mean you're always going to be right, but you can make a more educated guess on where the line is. Do I need this picture to tell this story, or is it just trauma porn? You know, for lack of a better term. And, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, you know, yes, having that graphic image is what we need to wake people up to get that attention. But a lot of times it's not. And there's a more nuanced way to tell the story. And you can still show emotion. You can still show frustration. You can show sadness. You can show all sorts of emotions, but you can do it delicately. And I think that's our responsibility. And I think, you know, these protests draw people out that want to make a portfolio image rather than to actually connect and tell stories. And I think that's really problematic. But I think we can work together to kind of change that culture in the industry.
Michael, I am curious about your experience too. Being that you've captured, I'm assuming based off of the bio that you captured like revolutions or some type of conflict, right? And I'm curious, especially out of the US, we know what that looks like for us. And sometimes it's not necessarily as widespread violence, like let's say it happened in Egypt or something like that. So I'm just curious your perspective on it.
Revolutions in general and covering them more.
Yeah, just like the same question to you. I feel like you have been digesting so much information, but I'm curious about your experience as a photojournalist abroad and like how that applies.
So one thing I was going to say that I thought was a really good point that Lindsay brought up about the anger in the community and sort of like recognizing that what, say, a white photographer going into a community might see as anger is actually it's more cultural. When I was living in Congo and working there for, like about 4 years, I would generally hire like a local Congolese, especially because I only speak a little bit of French. I understand a few words of, Lingala and Swahili, but I don't fluently speak the language. And, the people from Western Congo, Kinshasa, are often very loud and animated. They'll say, "Hey, give me some mustard." Because you'll be like, "Whoa, was he mad?" It's like, no, it's how they are, man. They'll just like yell at each other, and you think, "Whoa, are they having a fight?" But it's how they are. And so I've been very fortunate that I've been exposed to a variety of cultures. And so when I see things like happen on the street here in LA, and again, I'm a white guy who grew up in a farming community. Like I'm still, when I come home to America, I'm still like, if anything, I feel more foreign still covering like events here. But like at the beginning of the week, when I first heard about these protests, I actually saw a friend of mine at the city hall who was on assignment. Like I had no idea that there was a protest happening, and I had my phone. I didn't even have my camera on me. So I joined. I was shooting some video, but I was kind of hanging back, and I was actually just like marching, with everybody. And that's really what say drew me in. At the time I was living in China when the Arab Spring happened. I hopped on a plane. I flew to Libya because I was drawn by what I was like seeing on CNN and reading online. And so I went, of course I'm a photographer, I'm going to record what's around me, but I went because of this human connection, even though I'm not Libyan, I don't understand anything. I speak a little bit of Arabic, but I don't understand anything about, that experience. But I can try and understand on a human level. I can immediately connect into something because the person is human, and one thing like, growing up in our household, my parents always had exchange students, people from Africa, Asia, Europe, South America. So from a young age, even though I wasn't around a lot of Black, culture, and, I didn't have any understanding of, the African American experience, I was still exposed to the world. But I'm just like, as a photojournalist, it's, us white males especially have to just, keep our mouths closed at this moment and really try and listen. And I don't mean it's I have Black friends, I have, Black colleagues, but like, even though I know people, it's not the same as like, what am I trying to say? It's like, even though I know them, it's like, I haven't, I don't know them. So yeah, no, I don't. So, being at the protest and going to the protest, of course, I'm going to photograph everything I see that I'm drawn to, though I won't, necessarily load that on my Instagram, but I have always, as a photographer and just as a human, I've always recorded everything that I see that I feel is important. When I was in Libya, I photographed everything I saw. I made a book about it that would probably be looked at, by a lot of people as being very controversial, because there's a lot of people in the book who are dead, whose mothers, whose families, whose friends would maybe not want to see them in the book. Why did I do that? I did it because it it happened. That is war. That's what war looks like. If we don't see those images, that is problematic. That's why, I wasn't around, but from what I understand, when the Vietnam War was happening, that's why photography played such a crucial role in ending the war, because we were seeing in the newspapers dead American soldiers. So there's a reason why we don't see those images anymore from Afghanistan or Iraq. So it's like, on one hand, we do have to be respectful, and we do have to be cautious, and we do have to be sensitive, but we do have to show the world as it looks, and we have to show the circumstances of these people. But and also going into what was said earlier about the kinds of images, like, that is a real problem. Like, it's not only a problem that there's not enough Black photographers and editors in the newsroom, even editors, like managing editors, head editors, and people who are at the higher positions as well, because these are the people who choose the images at the end of the day. But that it's true that so much of the time, the more sensational images are the ones that are chosen, because it's like, these are easier things as well as a photographer to photograph, because they're visual. The more nuanced and the more like subtle, sensitive side is just, that's really when that's a layer that I think a lot of people just aren't aware of.
How as image makers, how do we change that? Because I've been trying to change that, but like you were saying, the photo editors that are on top, they don't want those imagery. They don't want that type of imagery at all.
Some of them do. It just, my experience, and again, like, I don't have as much experience as other people, but from what I know, it's usually editors are sort of a mix, and they are drawn to both images, but then at the end of the day, it's like, what is the mission of the organization, and who is the editor? So whoever is really, at the top in the meeting, they'll decide what's on the front page.
Doesn't social media and other markets, isn't that an opportunity to start to try and change the narrative of the top-down view?
I agree with that. Yeah, because the type of imagery that I show, a lot of advertising companies, corporations, and editorial people are looking at my work, and I do agree with that, and the masses of the people. So it has a different. Like Lindsay and I photograph, and she's working for, the newspapers. I'm not. So I'm shooting the way that I would like to shoot. And it shows two different perspectives.
Though I do a lot more editorial and commercial work, I do have to say that for those who have hired me, they want me to continue to shoot the way that I've always been shooting, rather than, regulating what the actual story, what the story is. So I have to applaud the editors that I've worked with. Now, I can always push back on them as well. So just because an editor may agree about, they may see something that they like, I can also say, hey, I don't think that would be the best image or best, tone to use for a particular photo. So, if we are talking about, making the system better, decolonizing the system, we also have to be able to step up and say how things could potentially be interpreted about a photo. So, still having your voice in whatever, creative way that you're using it is important, and also using that same voice to give your opinion as to what something may look like is just as important.
And now's the time too. Now's the time, because I think as people are awakened to this, systematic racism that influences our entire life in every capacity. If a Black person or an ally vocalizes that there is a tone that does not positively or has some type of impact that in the long run would have like a positive impact or awareness or exposure on something, and you challenge that, and then the publication or the higher ups don't listen, and then it's perceived badly, we now have platforms of our own using social media that we can vocalize that out. And that's why, though cancel culture exists, I don't fully believe it's cancel culture. I think it's receiving the repercussions of your actions. And I mean, of course, there's some elements that it's like, it's a defined balance, but I think most times it's repercussions of not listening when people brought something up. And now, the shit hits the fan, as a very eloquent way to say that. We because of social media, we now have the power to set the tone that we want to set if the publications won't give us that platform.
So for the listeners, if they want to find your work and follow you, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is Lynsey, Lynsey, Weatherspoon, WeatherSpoon.com. And my Instagram and Twitter are both LN Weatherspoon. And
for me, it's Sheila Prebright, SheilaPreeBright.com. That's my website. My IG and Twitter is She Prebright, ShePreeBright.
My website is ew.photos. So EW.photos. That's it. And then my Instagram is EW.photos and then the number 1.
Michael Christopher Brown is my Instagram, and that's kind of, the most current. The website is still under construction. I'm still adding captions and all that stuff. So, but anyway, the website is also the same, Michael Christopher Brown.
My website is Gershphoto, GERSH my Instagram is Gershphoto, and my Twitter is different because I needed to be different apparently, and it is PD_cameraman.
I'm so glad that we chose to incorporate photography into our usually only filmmaking oriented podcast, but filmmaking is telling stories through images, and so is photography. And especially, obviously, we chose to do this because of the importance of the time that's happening right now. And
I think it's important. It's necessary. This is not our typical type of episode, right? But it felt necessary, and it felt like a good panel of people that we could really learn some stuff from. And I don't think there's a lot to say about this one. I think it's all pretty self-evident.
It's in the conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and I was honestly just pleased to be a part of it, and I learned a lot, and I think that's what the whole intention for me was for doing this one. Just as a side note, if you want to see some of the images from the panelists today, you can find them at independentfilmmakersguide.com.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. The first 10 commenters are immediately entered to win a monthly prize. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about the future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more information about today's guest, visit us at frameworkfilm.com for visuals, diagrams, and more. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Sunboom, a photographer from Minneapolis, and I'm reading the credits. IFG is produced by Framework Productions and directed by James Allerdyce. It's produced by Matt Mundy, edited by Audrey Rae McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. Thanks for listening.